All right, good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. How is everyone doing today? Today we are going to read through chapter 11 of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Yesterday we did chapters...
Aldous Huxley.
Yesterday we did chapters 9 and 10 because they were pretty short. So if that happens again, today we'll read 2 chapters instead of 1. All right, well, in the last chapter ended in a very interesting way because Bernard was about to get fired from his very good job, and the boss made a big show. The director of the department made a big show about firing him in front of everyone. And just as he was doing that, Bernard introduced him to his son, which was a very shameful event for him. So that's where we left off, and that's where we will start with chapter 11. Before we start, if this is your first time watching, I'm not just reading the words. The whole point of this is to explore vocabulary and phrases. So as we're reading, we'll talk about words that maybe you don't know, or phrases that maybe if you're learning English won't be very clear for you. And if you're watching this live, I want you to ask questions and make comments, and I will read them as we go. That's the whole point of this. If you don't, I'll just stop sometimes when I think this might be an interesting or useful word for you, or this might be a phrase that could be useful for you, or something. Sometimes I don't know what some of these words mean. So sometimes I stop for my own education. All right, so let's get started with chapter 11. After the scene in the fertilizing room, so this is where Bernard brings in his son and says, "Look, this is your son," and it was very embarrassing. And actually, the I think at the end of chapter 10, the director ran out covering his face. He was so embarrassed, and everyone was laughing at him. That's the scene that they're talking about in the fertilizing room. After the scene in the fertilizing room, all upper caste London was wild to see this delicious creature who had fallen on his knees before the director of hatcheries and conditioning, or rather the ex-director. For the poor man had resigned immediately. That means quit. He quit. For the poor man resigned immediately afterwards and never set foot inside the center again. You know, we use this phrase, set foot. Usually we talk about it when you refuse to go somewhere. Imagine you go to a restaurant and you receive some very bad treatment at the restaurant. And then instead of saying, "I will never come here again," the phrase you use is set foot. "I will never set foot here again." That's a very extreme phrase that you use when you're extremely angry and you say, "I will never come here again. I will never set foot in this place again." But also you can use it if you're extremely embarrassed and you can't show your face. "Oh, I can never set foot in there again." So that's an interesting phrase, and I want to write that down because I think that would be interesting to make a video about that, to set foot in a place. Fari Boris says hi. Hi, Fari Boris. How is everything in Vancouver, right? You're in Vancouver? Okay, so that's a good phrase. So the poor man had resigned immediately and never set foot inside the center again. Then we know for sure that he's very embarrassed and ashamed, and he can never go back there. Had flopped down and called him. Wait, there's something. I guess we better read this again. Wait, had flopped down and called him. The joke was almost too good to be... Okay, so they're talking about the scene when the boy comes into the room and he falls to his knees and he says, "Father." Had flopped down and called him. The joke was almost too good to be true. "My father." Linda, on the contrary, cut no ice. That must be an expression, but I don't know what that means. Nobody had the smallest desire to see Linda. So maybe that means nobody cared about her. To say one was a mother, that was past a joke. So that wasn't funny. That wasn't even funny to call yourself a mother. It was an obscenity. Moreover, she wasn't a real savage, had been hatched out of a bottle and conditioned like anyone else, so couldn't have really quaint ideas. Finally, quaint means like simple. When you call something quaint, I never think that quaint is a bad thing. It just means very simple. To me, it means like simple and nice. But let's see how they define quaint. Attractively unusual or old-fashioned. Well, so I guess the official definition of quaint is old-fashioned. I guess because I'm old-fashioned and I like quaint things. But to me, when I think about that word quaint, I think of things that are simple and nice. Moreover, she wasn't a real savage. Had been hatched out of a bottle and conditioned like anyone else, so couldn't have really quaint ideas. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but okay. Finally, and this was by far the strongest reason for people's not wanting to see poor Linda, there was her appearance. Fat. Uh-oh, I guess they wouldn't like me. Having lost her youth, with bad teeth, and a blotched complexion. If your complexion is like the color of your skin, if you have a healthy complexion, you'll have some color in it. If you have a sickly complexion, probably you have no color in your face. So complexion is talking about how your skin appears. And blotchy means that she has spots on her face, like maybe red spots. A blotch is like well, we better look at that word blotch. See what kind of pictures we get with blotch. I'm doing it on Google, so it's probably the name of a movie or a cartoon character, and that's all they'll show. No good. They haven't commercialized that word yet. They haven't monetized that word yet. Well, you can see the spots. These should be green, but instead you see these little spots. So you can call that blotchy. But actually, I wasn't thinking of a plant when I thought of the word blotch. I was thinking of like this. So this is really the image I get in my head when I think of a blotch. It's like the round shape of ink spilling onto something. But you get the idea. So if you imagine she has a blotchy... Oh, I wonder what happens if we put blotchy complexion here. Oh, I spelled complexion wrong. But you can see this is a blotchy complexion. This is exactly what I imagined from that word. A blotchy complexion. Okay. N. Rao says, you should be behind the text so that the whole text must be in front of the screen. Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. I don't like showing my face in a video, but I think that YouTube doesn't like it if you hide your face. That's what I read anyway. I don't know if that's true. Okay, let's see. To say one was a mother, that was past a joke. It was an obscenity. Moreover, she wasn't a real savage, had been hatched out of a bottle, and conditioned like anyone else, so couldn't really have quaint ideas. Finally, this was by far this... So maybe she wasn't useful to them. They wanted to study this boy who was one of them, but was born in this savage society. So he was interesting, but she wasn't so interesting to them. Finally, and this was by far the strongest reason for people's not wanting to see poor Linda, was her appearance, fat, having lost her youth, with bad teeth and a blotched complexion. And that figure, Ford, you simply couldn't look at her without feeling sick. Yes, positively sick. So the best people were quite determined not to see Linda, and Linda, for her part, had no desire to see them. The return to civilization was for her the return to soma. So remember, soma is this drug they're always taking. So they never feel sad or depressed or angry. They always feel good because they're always taking this drug. And Linda didn't care about returning to society. She was just happy that now she could have soma again. Oh, and Rao is saying, "Oh, it's the face in the corner." Oh no, I keep that there because probably somebody, probably people steal these videos, so it's good to have some kind of mark there. So if they try to steal it, I still have my name there. I think that's a good idea to keep that there, even though I know that it's kind of annoying, but I spend a lot of hours every day making these videos, so if somebody steals it, I still want my name. The return to civilization was for her to return to soma, was the possibility of lying in bed and taking holiday after holiday without ever having to come back to a headache or a fit of vomiting, without ever being made to feel as you always felt after peyote. So I think peyote is peyote. That's kind of like a little cactus or something, and it's like a drug, and if you take it, you will hallucinate. That really is a drug that exists, and that's what they take in the Savage Reservation. But soma never makes you feel sick. It just always makes you feel happy. As though you'd done something so shamefully antisocial that you could never hold up your head again. Soma played none of these unpleasant tricks. The holiday it gave was perfect, and if the morning after was disagreeable, it was so, not intrinsically, but only by comparison with the joys of the holiday. The remedy was to make the holiday continuous. Greedily, she clamored for ever larger, even more frequent doses. So clamor, let's define that word. That's hard to define. Clamor. We've talked about it before. A loud and confused noise, that of people shouting vehemently. Well, I don't think that's not how they're using it here. When you clamor for something, that's like, imagine you wake up in the middle of the night and you have to leave your bed, but you don't turn on the lights, and you're reaching around and you're falling over things. To me, that's clamoring. That's not what the definition is here, though. So I'm not sure about that. But let's see. And remember, a dose is like a measurement of medicine. So if the doctor says, here, take 2 spoons of this medicine, that's the dose. That's the amount of medicine you have to take. It's the measurement of medicine you're supposed to take. Is news singular or plural? Because this is Enrao. Enrao is asking, is news singular plural? Because my school principal got offended when I told him that news always counts as singular. Please clear this doubt. It probably started out as a plural word. New information, news, but it is not. It is treated like, let's see. If you say water is wet, okay, water it isn't plural or singular. It's just, well, it's one idea, so it's singular. It's a thing you can't count. And news is in that category. It's an uncountable noun. So, for example, you can't say one news, two news, three news. That doesn't make any sense. You can say one piece of news or one article of news or one. That's usually what you would say, right? A piece of news or an article of news. I can't think of you have to use like a counting word if you want to count it. So if you're talking about the verb, you use the singular form of the verb like you would with any uncountable noun, like water is wet, pollution is bad, the news is interesting. It's in the category of uncountable. So you don't say how many news, you say how much news, just like you say how much salt, how much sugar, how much pollution. Okay, let's see. The remedy was to make the holiday continuous. Greedily, she clamored for so I picture her going like this, give me more, give me more. That's what I think they mean by clamor here, but that's not how Google defines clamor, so that's pretty weird. Dr. Shaw at first demurred. I think that means, let's look at that word demur, but I think that means that he gave it to her. He gave her more medicine and didn't ask questions. Let's see. Reserve, modest, affectionately modest. Oh, at first he didn't want to. At first he didn't want to give her all those drugs. Then let her have what she wanted. She took as much as 20 grams a day, which will finish her off in a month or two. To finish someone off means to kill them. So they know that if she continues taking this amount of this drug, she will kill herself. The doctor confided in Bernard. To confide is to share a secret. So he said, within a month or two, that will finish her off. That will kill her. One day the respiratory center will be paralyzed. No more breathing. Finished. And a good thing, too. If we could rejuvenate, of course, it would be different, but we can't. This word, juven, J-U-V-E-N, means young. So, re means again. So when you say rejuvenate, it means like make young again. So he's saying, if we could make her young again, that would be different. But it's probably better if she kills herself because she's old and fat and she doesn't have any teeth. It's probably just best if she dies in a few months. Surprisingly, as everyone thought, for on Soma holiday, Linda was most conveniently out of the way. John raised objections. But aren't you shortening her life by giving her so much? In one sense, yes, Dr. Shaw admitted, but in another, we're actually lengthening it. The young man stared, uncomprehending. Soma may make you lose a few years in time, the doctor went on, but think of the enormous, immeasurable durations it can give you out of time. Every Soma holiday is a bit of what our ancestors used to call eternity. John began to understand eternity was in our lips and eyes. Eternity was in our lips and eyes, he murmured. I guess that must be a quotation, probably a Shakespeare quotation. I have no idea what that must mean. John began to understand. Eternity was in our lips and eyes, he murmured. Nothing. Forget it. Of course, Dr. Shaw went on. You can't allow people to go popping off into eternity if they've got any serious work to do. But as she hasn't got any serious work, all the time, John persisted, I don't believe it's right. The doctor shrugged his shoulders. This is shrugging your shoulders. Well, of course, if you prefer to have her screaming mad all the time. In the end, John was forced to give in. Linda got her Soma. Thenceforward, she remained in her little room on the 37th floor of Bernard's apartment house in bed with the radio and television always on, and the patchouli tap just dripping, and the soma tablets within reach of her hand, there she remained, and yet wasn't there at all. So she was there physically, but she wasn't there mentally. She was in outer space on drugs. Was all the time away, infinitely far away on holiday, in some other world where the music of the radio was a labyrinth of sonorous colors. Okay, well, let's look at this word labyrinth. We've looked at that word before, but it's not the most common word, but it is used sometimes, and I think that's a word that even if you're pretty advanced, you may not know. A labyrinth is a maze, and if you don't know what a maze is, let's look at a picture. It's like a complicated route. It's complicated on purpose. This is a labyrinth or a maze. Usually you talk about maze when you're talking about, well, look, they make a distinction. They say a labyrinth is in the shape of a circle and a maze is in the shape of a square. But I think the way they usually use labyrinth is, a labyrinth is something that you physically walk through. And a maze is like a game that you play, usually, like a mind game. A sliding, palpitating labyrinth that led, by what beautifully inevitable windings, to a bright center of absolute conviction, where the dancing images of the television box were the performers in some indescribably delicious, all-singing feely, where the dripping patchouli was more than scent, was the sun. Sometimes this is making me nervous, because when I go to bed I like to use some fragrance in my bedroom, and I usually use patchouli fragrance to relax when I'm going to bed. So now I feel like Linda. I'm thinking, oh no, am I like Linda? And I have the TV on. But I'm not on drugs. Let's see. Where the dripping patchouli was more than a scent, was the sun, was a million saxophones, was Pope making love, only much more so, incomparably more, and without end. No, we can't rejuvenate, that means we can't make ourselves young again. But I'm very glad, Dr. Shaw had concluded, to have had this opportunity to see an example of senility in a human being. Thank you so much for calling me in. He shook Bernard warmly by the hand. It was John, then, they were after all. And as it was only through Bernard, his accredited guardian, that John could be seen, Bernard now found himself, for the first time in his life, treated to not merely normally, but as a person of outstanding importance. There was no more talk of the alcohol in his blood surrogate. No jibes about the personal appearance. Henry Foster went out of his way to be friendly. So everyone is now very impressed, and they like Bernard very much, because this experiment that he's doing, or this academic exercise that he's doing, is very respected by everyone. Before, they used to hate him, and they used to joke about him behind his back. And now everybody likes him. He's the flavor of the month. You know, the flavor, when you say the flavor of the month, that means everybody likes that flavor ice cream this month. Next month, they'll get bored and they'll try something new. But this month, everybody likes him. So I think Bernard is the flavor of the month. Henry Foster went out of his way to be friendly. Benito Hoover made him a present of 6 packets of sex hormone chewing gum. The assistant predestinator came and cadged almost abjectly for an invitation to one of Bernard's evening parties. Cadged. Let's look at that word, cadged. I'm not familiar with that word. Cadge. ask for or obtain, something to which one is not strictly entitled. He eats whenever he can cadge a meal. When he can ask for a meal that people don't have to give him. Okay, like maybe an animal, like a dog might cadge for food. That's not really, I think, a common word that you have to worry about, though. So you don't have to worry about remembering that and using that. I think you probably would impress people if you did, though. People would say, "What is that?" As for the women, Bernard had only 2 hints at the possibility of an invitation, and he could have whichever of them he liked. Bernard asked me to meet the savage next Wednesday, Fanny announced triumphantly. "I'm so glad," said Lenina, "and now you must admit that you were wrong about Bernard. Don't you think he's really rather sweet?" Fanny nodded. "And I must say," she said, "I was quite agreeably surprised. The chief bottler, the director of predestination, 3 deputy assistant, fertilizer generals, and the professor of Feelies. I don't know what Feelies are. They keep mentioning that, but I think that's just a term they invented for the book. In the College of Emotional Engineering, the dean of the Westminster Community Singery, and the supervisor of Bokanovskification. That's really hard to say. Bokanovskification. The list of Bernard's notabilities was interminable. Well, you know the word terminate means finish, and terminable means can finish, but interminable means never can finish. Never will finish. So unending. "And I had 6 girls last week," he confided to Helmholtz Watson. 1 on Monday, 2 on Tuesday, 2 more on Friday, and 1 on Saturday. And if I had the time or the inclination, there were at least a dozen more who were only too anxious." Helmholtz listened to his boastings in silence, so gloomily disapproving that Bernard was offended. "You're envious?" he said. Helmholtz shook his head. "I'm rather sad, that's all," he answered. Bernard went off in a huff. To go off, to huff is to go huff, huff. That's huffing. So if somebody goes off in a huff, they're angry. When they walk away, that's going off in a huff. He told himself he would never speak to Helmholtz again. The days passed. Success went fizzily to Bernard's head. When something goes to your head, that means, maybe you did a good job and now everybody's saying, "Oh, good job." So your head is getting big and you think, "Wow, I'm the best person in the whole world." That's something going to your head. So he's starting to behave like a very unlikable person. People are beginning not to like him very much because he thinks he's so wonderful. His success has gone to his head. And in the process completely reconciled him, as any good intoxicant should do, to a world which up till then he had found very unsatisfactory. Insofar as it recognized him as important, the order of things was good, but reconciled by his success, yet refused to forego the privilege of criticizing this order. For the act of criticizing heightened his sense of importance, made him feel larger. Moreover, he did genuinely believe that there were things to criticize. At the same time, he genuinely liked being a success and having all the girls he wanted, before those who now, for the sake of the savage, paid their court to him. Bernard would parade a carping unorthodoxy. He was politely listened to, but behind his back, people shook their head. So Bernard has never really agreed with or liked the system. And now everybody admires him as a scientist because of this thing that he's doing, this experiment that he's doing. And now he feels even freer to criticize things. But people don't like that because most people are very happy with the society where they live. So they're starting not to like him very much. Number one, because his success is going to his head and he thinks he's smarter and more important than he really is. And number two, he's being much more honest about, or much more open about, how he feels about this society where they live. So people are talking behind his back. That young man will come to a bad end, they said, prophesying. That means like prophesying. That means like predicting the future. Prophesying the more confidently prophesying the more confidently in that they themselves would in due course personally see to it that that end was bad. Oh, so they're saying that guy will come to a bad end. His future does not look good. And the reason they're saying that is because they don't like him and they're planning how they're going to destroy him. He won't find another savage to help him out a second time, they said meanwhile, because he was about to get fired from his job when he discovered the director's son in this savage reservation and took him back to society and embarrassed him and got the director fired. And then Bernard got a lot of admiration and a lot of credit for this. But now they're saying he won't find another savage to save him. So eventually, yeah, he will eventually be fired or meet a very bad future. Meanwhile, however, there was the first savage. They were polite. And because they were polite, Bernard felt positively gigantic. Gigantic and at the same time light with elation, lighter than air. Lighter than air, said Bernard, pointing upwards, like a pearl in the sky. High, high above them, the weather department's captive balloon shone rosily in the sunshine. The said savage, so ran Bernard's instructions, to be shown civilized life in all its aspects. He was being shown a bird's-eye view of it at present, a bird's-eye view from the platform of the Charing-T Tower. The station master and the resident meteorologist were acting as guides, but it was Bernard who did most of the talking. Intoxicated, he was behaving as though the very least he were visiting the world controller. Lighter than air. The Bombay green rocket dropped out of the sky. The passengers alighted. 8 identical Dravidian twins in khaki looked out of the 8 portholes of the cabin. The stewards. 1,250 kilometers an hour, said the station master impressively. What do you think of that, Mr. Savage? John thought it was very nice. Still, he'd said Ariel could put the girdle round the earth in 40 minutes. Luis Sanchez says, good morning, Professor. I'm enjoying your lecture with my early brew of a good cup of coffee. Love your readings. Thank you, Luis. Well, since we stopped reading for a minute, I think I have to take a 1-minute break. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. But nature calls. All right, we're back. I apologize. Okay, let's keep going here. The savage, wrote Bernard in his report to Mustapha Mond, shows surprisingly little astonishment at or awe of civilized inventions. This is partly due, no doubt, to the fact that he has heard of them talked about by the woman Linda in Mustapha Mond frowned. You know, frowned is the opposite of a smile. It's a smile. That's a frown. They say a frown is a smile turned upside down. Does the fool think I'm too squeamish to see the word written out at full length? What word? Oh, I see. So Bernard is writing a report, and he's talking about the savage, and he says, this is partly due, no doubt, to the fact that he has heard them talked about that woman, Linda, his M, and he doesn't write the rest of the word, which is mother. And Mustapha Mond, who's a very, very important man, is a little bit angry about this. He's saying, does he think that I'm going to be offended if I see the word mother written down? Uh-oh, let's see. My mouse just stopped working. Let's see. Uh-oh. Okay. Don't worry, I'm prepared. I have another mouse, but the thing about this other mouse is it's very noisy. So I don't like to use it, but I have to now. Okay. Partly on his interest of being focused on what he calls the soul, which he persists in regarding as an entity independent of the physical environment, whereas I tried to point out to him, the controller skipped to the next sentences and was just about to turn the page in search of something more interestingly concrete, when his eye was caught by a series of quite extraordinary phrases. Though I must admit, he read, that I agree with the savage in finding civilized infantility too easy, or as he puts it, not expensive enough. And I would like to take this opportunity of drawing your lordship's attention to Mustapha Mond's anger gave place almost at once to mirth. Mirth means like happiness or amusement. So at first, Mustapha Mond is reading this report, and he's getting angry. But then when he reads this line about the savage thinks let's read that again. Though I must admit, he read, that I agree with the savage in finding civilized infantility too easy. So infant means baby, and I think you could agree with this now. I think this book was written in the 1930s, but we're all kind of like babies. If we are compared to our great-grandparents or somebody 150 years ago or 100 years ago, where you were much more in touch with having to take care of yourself than you are now. So, you had to go out and get your food. You had to go out and work really hard all the time. You had to be out in the world, but now we're treated more like babies, and we act more like babies too. And I think that's what he means by, I don't know, I'm no expert, but I think that's what he means by civilized infantility. So the savage thinks that the people in this society are like babies. Civilized infantility. Expensive enough. Hadi, good morning, Hadi. How are you doing today? Smoking in public will be frowned upon. Yes. If you frown upon something, that means you disapprove of it. It doesn't mean that you would say anything about it. Okay, it doesn't mean that you walk up to someone and say, don't smoke. It just means if people see you doing it, they shake their head and they don't like it and they disapprove of it. And he says that civilized infertility, and that it seems like it's not. He says it's not expensive enough. Like maybe what that means is life is too easy for people. And I would like to take this opportunity of drawing your Fordship's attention to now Mustafa Moan's anger. So he was angry at first, insulted. And now his anger gave place to mirth. Mirth is like amusement, feeling happy or laughing a little bit. The idea of this creature solemnly lecturing him about the social order was really too grotesque. Oh, so he doesn't agree with it. He can't believe that Bernard would write stuff like this to such an important man. The man must have gone mad. I ought to give him a lesson, he said to himself, and then threw back his head and laughed aloud. For the moment, at any rate, the lesson would not be given. Uh-oh. So he's making some very important people angry. He's insulting some very important people. It was a small factory of lighting sets for helicopters, a branch of the Electrical Equipment Corporation. They were met on the roof itself. For that, I'm using my backup mouse. It's not as good as the other mouse. For that circular letter of recommendation from the controller was magical in its effects. By the chief technician and the human element manager, they walked downstairs into the factory. Each process, explained the human element manager, is carried out so far as possible by a single Volkanovsky group. And in effect, 83 almost noseless black brachycephalic deltas were cold pressing. I think they used that word before, brachycephalic. When you see that word cephalus, that means like head. And that was some kind of deformation of the head. But let's take a picture of it. Let's look at a picture of it to remind ourselves of what it looks like. Let's see if we can find an image. Okay. Well, it's like a head shape. I guess it's not so obvious that there's something a little bit different about it, but you can see this kind of I guess it's kind of like a flat head on the back. It seems like. Brachycephalic. Nobody knows. I mean, if you said that to a person, people would say, what? What is that? I don't know. Alex says, good morning. Good morning, Alex. How are you doing today? Okay, let's see. Where was that word brachycephalic? And in effect, 83 almost noseless black brachycephalic deltas were cold pressing. So there were these people, 83 people in the laboratory with this condition, and they were doing something. I don't know what cold pressing is, but they were doing some kind of work in the laboratory. The 56 force spindle chucking and turning machines were being manipulated by 56 aquiline and ginger gammas. What is aquiline? Oh, it's kind of like the nose of an eagle. I was making a video yesterday, and I did a side view like that, and I thought, oh wow, I hate my nose. I hate the way maybe I have an aquiline nose. Because I was looking at that thinking, I don't like it. So that's aquiline. It's kind of the nose of an eagle. Okay, let's go back here. Wait, I'm just going to see if I can use this other mouse. Let's see. Oh, that's better. Okay. 170 heat-conditioned Epsilon Senegalese were working in the factory foundry. 33 Delta females, long-headed, sandy, with narrow pelvises, all within 20 millimeters of 1 meter, 69 centimeters tall, were cutting screws in the assembling room. The dynamos were being put together by 2 sets of Gamma Plus dwarves. The 2 low work tables faced one another. Between them crawled the conveyor with its load of separate parts. 47 blonde heads were confronted by 47 brown ones. 47 snubs by 47 hooks. 47 receding by 47 prognathous chins. Let's look at that word, prognathous. Being or having a jaw, and typically a lower jaw that projects forward, especially to an unusual degree. Let's see if we can see a picture of that. That's an awfully specific word. But this is what it means. It just means the jaw sticks out. And they show so this is a normal lower jaw, and this is a prognathic jaw. "47 snubs by 47 hooks, 47 receding by 47 prognathous chins." This is your jaw. This is your chin. The completed mechanisms were inspected by 18 identical curly auburn girls. Auburn means like reddish-brown hair. So he's just describing everyone by physical features. Some people have chins that stick out, and some people have chins that are normal, and he's referring to these women as the color of their hair, which is like a reddish brown color, auburn. In gamma green, packed in crates by 34 short-legged, left-handed male delta minuses, and loaded into the waiting trucks and lorries by 63 blue-eyed, flaxen and freckled Epsilon semi-morons. A moron is a person who has very, very, very low intelligence. It used to be a word that was a scientific word, like you would classify someone as a moron if their IQ level was very low. But now it's only used in an insulting way. So if you think that someone is very stupid and you hate them, you can call them a moron. "Oh, brave new world." By some malice of his memory, the savage found himself repeating Miranda's words. "Oh, brave new world that has such people in it. And I assure you," the human element manager concluded as they left the factory, "we hardly ever have any trouble with our workers. We always find..." But the savage had suddenly broken away from his companions. You know, when you break away, that's a phrasal verb. It kind of means like escape. So John, the savage, is taking a tour with this group, and he deviates. He goes somewhere else. And that's why they're using break away here. It kind of means escape. But the savage had suddenly broken away from his companions and was violently retching. Retching is like... Sorry for the disgusting noises, but that's retching. It's that sound, actually. It doesn't mean that you're vomiting, it's just that noise. So the savage had suddenly broken away from his companions and was violently retching behind a clump of laurels. So he went behind some flowers and started making those noises. Maybe he was vomiting, as though the solid earth had been a helicopter and an air pocket. The savage, wrote Bernard, refuses to take Soma and seems so much distressed because the woman Linda, his M, remains permanently on holiday. It's worthy of note that in spite of his M's senility and the extreme repulsiveness of her appearance, the savage frequently goes to see her and appears to be much attached to her. An interesting example of the way in which early conditioning can be made to modify and can even run counter to natural impulses. In this case, the impulse to recoil from an unpleasant object. At Eton, they alighted on the roof of the upper school, on the opposite side of the schoolyard. The 52 stories of Lupton's Tower gleamed white in the sunshine. College on their left hand, and on their right, the school community singery reared their venerable piles of ferro concrete and vitaglass. In the center of the quadrangle, that means like square. Why can't I say that word? Quadrangle. Stood the quaint old chrome steel statue of our Ford. Dr. Gaffney, the provost, and Miss Keat, the head mistress, received them as they stepped out of the plane. "Do you have many twins here?" the savage asked rather apprehensively as they set out on their tour of inspection. "Oh, no," the provost answered. "Eton is reserved exclusively for upper caste boys and girls. One egg, one adult. It makes education more difficult, of course. But as they'll be called upon to take responsibilities and deal with unexpected emergencies, it can't be helped." He sighed. Bernard, meanwhile, had taken a strong fancy to Miss Keat. "If you're free any Monday, Wednesday, or Friday evening," he was saying, jerking his thumb towards the savage. Jerking is a movement like this. So jerking his thumb towards the savage, he was going like this. "If you're free any Monday, Wednesday, or Friday evening," he was saying, jerking his thumb towards the savage. "He's curious, you know," Bernard added. Quaint. Miss Keat smiled. "I think what he's saying is, maybe you should have physical relations with him because he's curious about that." And they said, "Oh, that's quaint. That's very old-fashioned that he's very curious about that." Miss Keat smiled, and her smile was really charming, he thought. Said thank you, would be delighted to come to one of his parties. The provost opened the door. 5 minutes in, the Alpha Double Plus classroom left John a trifle bewildered. A trifle means an insignificant amount, and bewildered means confused. So this is just a really fancy way of saying a little confused. But both of those words, trifle, at least in North America, isn't such a common word. But bewildered is. Bewildered means really confused. It's stronger than confused. "What is elementary relativity?" he whispered to Bernard. Bernard tried to explain, and then thought the better of it and suggested they should go to some other classroom. When you think the better of something, you change your mind. So John the Savage asks this complicated question, and Bernard starts to explain, and then he thinks, he won't understand, and he changed his mind. He thought the better of it, and then they continued to go somewhere else. From behind a door in the corridor leading to a beta-minus geography room, a ringing soprano voice called 1, 2, 3, 4, and then with wary impatience, "As you were." When somebody, this is usually like in the military, but it could be anybody in charge of people who are very submissive. So it could be teacher to students, like young students, like children. But usually it's like in the military, when somebody important is talking to somebody more inferior, they say "as you were," which means continue doing what you were doing. Just relax. Don't think about me, because when there's somebody very important in front of you, maybe you stop what you're doing and you just wait for instructions, or you wait for them to talk. But then the person says "as you were," and that means go back to your activity. Don't think about me. "Malthusian drill," explained the headmistress. "Most of our girls are free martins, of course. I'm a free martin myself," she smiled. She smiled at Bernard. "But we have about 800 unsterilized ones who need constant drilling." In the Beta- geography room, John learned that a savage reservation is a place which, owing to unfavorable climatic or geological conditions or poverty of natural resources, has not been worth the expense of civilizing. A click. The room was in sudden darkness, and suddenly, on the screen above the master's head, there were the penitents of a coma. Penitent is when you feel bad, when you feel very sorry for doing something and you want to make things right. You are penitent. There were the penitents, but they're using the French word, so it's pénitent. There were the pénitents of a coma. I don't know why they're doing that, but the penitents of a coma prostrating themselves before Our Lady. And wailing. Wailing is like big, loud crying. "Ah, ah," they're very sorry. "Ah," they're wailing. As John had heard them wail, confessing their sins before Jesus on the cross, before the eagle image of Pukong, the young Etonians fairly shouted with laughter. Still wailing, the penitents rose to their feet, stripped off their upper garments with knotted whips, began to beat themselves, blow after blow. Remember, a blow is like a hit. I don't know. Are they watching a movie or something? Like they're at a very important school, but I didn't notice them mentioning like a television screen or a movie screen. But it sounds like they're watching a movie of savages doing some sort of religious ritual where they're very sorry in front of the Virgin and this other thing. What was it called? Pukong. And then they're beating themselves. They're what was the word they were using here? They're giving themselves blows. A blow is a very strong hit. But the students are laughing at what they're seeing. So the laughter drowned even the amplified record of their groans. "But why do they laugh?" asked the savage in a pained bewilderment. Remember, bewilder means very confused. So the savage boy is confused. Why are they laughing at that? That's a very serious thing that they're doing. "Why?" The provost turned towards him, a still broadly grinning face. "Why? Because it's so extraordinarily funny." In the cinematographic twilight, so they're watching a movie, Bernard risked a gesture which, in the past, even total darkness would hardly have emboldened him to make. Strong in his new importance, he put his arm round the headmistress' waists. It yielded willowy. Oh wow, willow. A willow is a tree. Willowy. I can't. Willowy. I don't really think that's a word, but here, let me show you what type of tree a willow is. Well, I think it's a classification, so it could also be like a plant, a certain type of plant. But when I think of willow, I always, maybe because where I grew up, there were many of these trees. This is a very common type of tree where I grew up. And that's a willow tree. A weeping willow. Weeping means crying. Because you see how the tree looks like it's crying? That's a weeping willow. But they have other things. That's why I'm thinking it's also a plant, because there's something called a pussy willow, and that's like also very common where I grew up. Is like this. So that's not really a tree. At least I guess it is a tree. Okay, well, you get the idea. But I think when he says that her body, how did he say it? Wow, try to say that word. Willow-willy. Bernard risked a gesture which, even in the past, even in total darkness, would hardly have emboldened him. Bold means brave, and so if something emboldens you, it means it makes you brave. So they're watching a movie and the lights are turned off, so he feels emboldened. Because the room is dark, he was emboldened to put his arm around the teacher. Strong in his new importance, he put his arm around the headmistress's waist. The waist is the middle part of the body here. It yielded willowily. So when he put his arms around her, she wasn't tense. She kind of leaned into it. She liked it. He was just about to snatch a kiss. Remember, snatch means take something very quickly. A kiss or two, and perhaps a gentle pinch, when the shutters clicked open again. Shutters, I think we've had that word before, but just in case. You know the word shut, like shut the door. So, in a building, you could have, these are classical sort of shutters. This is what I think of when I think of shutters. You see the black things on the windows, next to the windows on each side? Those are shutters. So you can close those and then there's no light. Or, you can close those to protect your windows if there's a very strong storm. Or for security. So here I think they're just closing the shutters so that the room is dark and they could watch the movie. So the shutters clicked open again. "Perhaps we had better go on," said Miss Keat, and moved towards the door. "And this," said the provost a moment later, "is the hypnopedic control room." Hundreds of synthetic music boxes, one for each dormitory, stood ranged in shelves from three sides of the room. Pigeonholed in the fourth were paper and soundtrack rolls on which the various hypnopedic lessons were printed. I don't know if this is really a useful word anymore, because everything's digital now. But a pigeonhole, well, here, let's take a look at this picture. They probably still have them in places. So these are pigeons. These birds are pigeons, very common in most cities. You can see pigeons everywhere. And a pigeonhole is where you see them sitting. But you used to use this word to talk about something like this, where you put papers, like a mailbox. I remember, like, when I was growing up and like the school where I went to school, the teachers had pigeonholes where, I don't know, you could leave messages or something, or I don't remember why I know that or what I would be doing with their pigeonholes, but that's a pigeonhole. But don't confuse that. These are very small. Don't confuse that with a cubby hole. These are very common in schools for children. This is where children put their things in a school, and that's called a cubby hole. So a pigeonhole is much smaller. Okay, let's see. "You slip the roll in here," explained Bernard, interrupting. "Dr. Gaffney, press down this switch. No, that one," corrected the provost, annoyed. "That one, then." The roll unwinds. The selenium cells transform the light impulses into sound waves. If you don't understand what's going on here, don't worry, because I don't either. And there you are, Dr. Gaffney concluded. Do they read Shakespeare? Asked the savage, as they walked on their way to the biochemical laboratories past the school library. Certainly not, said the headmistress, blushing. Our library, said Dr. Gaffney, contains only books of reference. If our young people need distraction, they can get it at the Feelies. We don't encourage them to indulge in any solitary amusements. 5 busloads of boys and girls, singing or in a silent embracement, rolled past them over the vitrified highway. That word vitre here, that's like a root word which means like glass. So vitrified, that's what I'm picturing. Well, let me just make sure about that. But I think that means that the road is like glass. Let me just check, because I don't trust myself. To convert into glass or glassy. So imagine, usually if you look at the highway or the road, it's made out of dirt or some kind of very strong material with a rough texture. But this is a vitrified highway. So the highway, it's almost like glass, or maybe is made from something like glass. Just returned, explained Dr. Gaffney, while Bernard, whispering, made an appointment with the headmistress for that very evening. From the slow crematorium, death conditioning begins at 18 months. Every tot spends 2 mornings a week in a hospital for the dying. Okay, I just want to look at this word tot for a minute, because that's a pretty useful word, believe it or not. Because you probably don't know it. I'd be surprised if you knew it. But before we can talk about that word, we have to look at another word. Because that word is short for something. All right, let's take a look here. And okay. There is a stage for children's development when they're learning to walk, like this. You see this kid. He's just learning to walk, so he walks in a very funny way because he's just learning how to do it. And this stage of development is called a toddler. A toddler. And so tot is short for toddler. So if you call someone a little tot, that's like calling someone a little child, like a little baby. Not really a baby though, a little bit older than a baby. And that's a tot. That's what a toddler is. And there's a very popular, wait, let me get a picture here. There's a very popular thing to eat in the US, probably in other English-speaking countries, I guess, too, even in non-English-speaking countries. These are potatoes made in a certain way. I love these, by the way. I haven't had these in a very long time. They don't really have these in Mexico. And these are called tater tots. So you have the word potato, which becomes short to tater. That's a funny way to say potato. Tater. And then you have the word tot, which means like little baby potatoes. Tater. I love tater tots. Do they have tater tots in your country? You can see, wait, let's see a package here. You can't really read it. It's too blurry, but it says tater tots. Little baby potatoes. So tot is kind of a nice way of referring to a child of that age. You can call them a little tot. Death conditioning begins at 18 months. Wait, I just want to reread that word. Yeah, okay, I think. Every tot spends 2 mornings a week in a hospital for the dying. So every child, so these are very, very young children, if he's calling them a tot. All the best toys are kept there, and they get chocolate cream on death days. They learn to take dying as a matter of course, like any other physiological process. But the headmistress put in the headmistress professionally. 8 o'clock at the Savoy. It was all arranged. On the way back to London, they stopped at the Television Corporation's factory at Brentford. "Do you mind waiting here for a moment while I go and telephone?" asked Bernard. The savage waited and watched. The main day shift was just going off duty. Crowds of lower caste workers were queued up in front of the monorail station. 700 or 800 Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon men and women, with not more than a dozen faces and statures between them, to each of them. You know what that means? Because they make these workers, these are the lowest people in the society, the Gammas and the Epsilons, and they mass produce them like in a factory, and they try to produce like 100 of these out of one egg. So all these people look the same. There aren't many differences between the way that they look, because they all come from the same place. And that's why he says, with not more than a dozen faces. A dozen means 12. So all this huge crowd of people, all of them have one of 12 different kinds of face. They all look the same. And statures, that means how high, how tall they are. To each of them, with his or her ticket, the booking clerk pushed over a little cardboard pillbox. The long caterpillar of men and women moved slowly forward. "What's in those?" remembering the Merchant of Venice. "Those caskets." Casket means like a little box. It could be a big box also. But that's an old-fashioned word. The only time that you probably would use the word casket now is to refer to this. But it just means box. But you could call this a coffin. Most people call it a coffin, but you can also call it a casket. But if I type the word antique here, you'll see that it also means box. Okay, they show like antique real coffins, but so you see this is just a little box. It's not for dead bodies. Also here you can see this little box. So you could also call this a casket if it's very old. But if you use the word casket now, it probably just refers to where you would put a dead body. But John, the savage boy, learned most of his English from Shakespeare. So when he says casket, he means box. Probably. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the Merchant of Venice, so I'm not sure how casket is used. Maybe it's for a body. I don't know. The savage inquired when Bernard had rejoined him. "The day's Soma ration," Bernard answered, rather indistinctly, for he was masticating a piece of Benito Hoover's chewing gum. Masticate is just a fancy word for chew. That's masticating. For he was masticating a piece of Benito Hoover's chewing gum. They get it after their work's over. 4 half-gram tablets, 6 on Saturdays. He took John's arm affectionately, and they walked back towards the helicopter. Lenina came singing into the changing room. "You seem very pleased with yourself," said Fanny. "I am pleased," she answered. Zip. "Bernard rang up half an hour ago." Zip, zip. She stepped out of her shorts. "He has an unexpected engagement." Zip. "Asked me if I'd like to take the savage to the Feelies this evening." "I must fly." She hurried away towards the bathroom. "She's a lucky girl," Fanny said to herself as she watched Lenina go. There was no envy in the comment. Good-natured Fanny was merely stating a fact. Lenina was lucky in having shared with Bernard a generous portion of the Savage's immense celebrity. Lucky in that, reflecting from her insignificant person the moment's supremely fashionable glory, had not the secretary of the Young Women's Fortean Association asked her to give a lecture about her experiences. Had she not been invited to the annual dinner at the Aphroditeum Club? So Aphrodite is the Greek goddess of love. So the Aphroditeum Club is a place where people go to have sex in groups. Had she not already appeared in the Feelytone news, visibly, audibly, tactfully appeared in countless millions all over the planet? Hardly less flattering had been the attentions paid her by conspicuous individuals. The resident world controller's second secretary had asked her to dinner and breakfast. She had spent 1 week and she had spent 1 weekend with the Ford Chief Justice, and another with the arch community songster of Canterbury. The president of the Internal and External Secretions Corporation was perpetually on the phone, and she had been to Deauville with the deputy governor of the Bank of Europe. It's wonderful, of course, and yet in a way she had confessed to Fanny, "I feel as though I were getting something on false pretenses." False pretenses means like, do you know what a surprise party is? Like, you know, somebody is having a birthday and you want to have a party for them with all of their friends and family, but you want it to be a surprise. Maybe you don't have that where you live, but maybe you've seen that in a movie. So you invite your friend, "Oh, come with me to the restaurant. I just want to buy you dinner for your birthday." Those are false pretenses. Like, that's a false reason to invite someone. Because what happens is really you take them somewhere and then, surprise! So false pretenses is when you invite someone to do something and they agree, but when they arrive at the destination, it's for a different reason. They discover it's for a different reason. So is it Lenina, or let's see. It's wonderful, of course, and yet in a way she had confessed to Fanny, "I feel as though I were getting something on false pretenses." So they're saying, "Hey, come to the party," and John is curious. The savage guy is curious about. He's curious, which I think means have sex with him. And Lenina says, "Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting," but she's like, "I have this feeling, they're telling me to come for this reason, but I don't think that's the real reason. I think these are false pretenses." Because, of course, the first thing, all they want to know is what it's like to make love to a savage. And I have to say, I don't know. She shook her head. "Most of the men don't believe me, of course, but it's true. I wish it weren't," she added sadly and sighed. "He's terribly good looking, don't you think so?" "But doesn't he like you?" asked Fanny. "Sometimes I think he does, and sometimes I think he doesn't. He always does his best to avoid me, go out of the room when I come in, won't touch me, won't even look at me. But sometimes if I turn round suddenly, I catch him staring, and then, well, you know how men look when they like you." Yes, Fanny knew. So, John grew up the way that normal humans now grow up, and he's very shy and embarrassed because he likes her. But in the society where he is now, they're very direct, and they're always looking at each other and touching each other. So she thinks he doesn't like her because he's very embarrassed and he can't look at her for too long. "I can't make it out," said Lenina. She couldn't make it out, and not only was bewildered, but was also rather upset, because you see, Fanny, I like him. Like him more and more. Well, now, there'd be a real chance, she thought, as she scented herself after her bath. Dab. This is a dab. Dab, dab. Dab, dab. A real chance, so she's applying perfume or something. Dab. Dab, dab. A real chance. Her high spirits overflowed in song. "Hug me till you drug me, honey. Kiss me till I'm in a coma. Hug me, honey, snuggly bunny. Love's as good as Soma." The secret organ was playing. The scent organ was playing, a delightfully refreshing herbal capriccio, rippling arpeggios of thyme and lavender, of rosemary, basil, and myrtle, and tarragon. A series of daring modulations through the spice keys into ambergris, and a slow return through sandalwood, camphor, cedar, and new mown hay. I love fragrances, so I think I would really love this machine. I feel guilty sometimes reading this book thinking, oh, I think I probably would like that. With occasional subtle touches of discord, a whiff of kidney pudding, and the faintest suspicion of pig's dung. Back to the simple aromatics with which the piece began. The final blast of time died away, and there was a round of applause. The lights went up. In the synthetic music machine, the soundtrack roll began to unwind. It was a trio of hyper violin, supercello, and oboe surrogate that now filled the air with its agreeable languor. What is languor? Let's look up that word languor. Lack of energy or vitality, sluggishness, lack of spirit or interest. So let's see. An agreeable languor. So he's talking about music, and the current music, the current instrument playing in oboe had an agreeable languor. So maybe it was playing, but it wasn't very noticeable or very exciting, but that was okay. That's why it was agreeable. 30 or 40 bars, and then against this instrumental background, a much more than human voice began to warble. Now throaty, now from the head, now hollow as a flute, now charged with yearning harmonics. It effortlessly passed from Gaspar Foster's low record on the very frontiers of musical tone to a trilled bat note high above the highest C, to which, in 1770 at the Ducal Opera in Parma, and to the astonishment of Mozart, Lucretia Adjugari, alone of all the singers in history, once piercingly gave utterance. Wow, that's an unnecessarily complex description of music. Sunk in their pneumatic stalls, Lenina and the savage sniffed and listened. It was now the turn also for the eyes and skin. The house lights went down. Fiery letters stood out silent, as though self-supported in the darkness. 3 weeks in a helicopter, and all super-singing, synthetic talking, colored, stereoscopic feely, with synchronized scent organ accompaniment. Take hold of those metal knobs on the arms of your chair, whispered Lenina. Otherwise, you won't get any of the feely effects. So I think now suddenly we've changed scenes, and now this is this moment when they're becoming physical together. And so special music is playing, and special fragrances are in the air, and they're using some kind of chair that has attachments. I don't understand. But I guess as we read on, we'll understand more. Those fiery letters, meanwhile, had disappeared. There were 10 seconds of complete darkness, and then suddenly, dazzling and incomparably more solid-looking than they would have seemed in actual flesh and blood, far more real than in reality, there stood the stereoscopic image locked down in one another's arms, of a gigantic Negro and a golden-haired young brachycephalic beta plus female. The savage started, that sensation on his lips. He lifted a hand to his mouth. The titillation ceased. Let his hand fall back on the metal knob. It began again. The scent organ, meanwhile, breathed pure musk, expiringly. A soundtrack super dove cooed. Coo is the sound of a dove, like ooh, ooh. I don't know if you know the sound of a pigeon. That's cooing. Ooh, ooh, and vibrating only 32 times a second. A deeper than African bass made answer. Ah, ooh, ooh, ah, I don't know. This is weird. The stereoscopic lips came together again, and once more the facial erogenous zones of the 6,000 spectators in the Alhambra tingled with almost intolerable galvanic pleasure. So I think what's happening... Okay, this now I think I understand. Because they keep referring to the feelies, which I think means the movies, but now they call them feelies because you sit in this chair, which gives you sensations, which does physical things to you, while the room fills with fragrances and music, and you watch it seems like they're watching pornography. It sounds like they're watching pornography in the movie. And there are 6,000 people in that room, and they're all having the same experience together. That's what it sounds like. The plot of the film was extremely simple. A few minutes after the first oohs and ahs, a duet having been sung and a little love made on the famous bearskin, every hair... I just have to see how many... Okay. There's still several pages left, so I was trying to avoid it, but I think I have to take another break. I'll be right back in 1 minute. Because I'm not going to be able to read all of these pages without another break. Let's see. Okay, I will be right back. If I can find my be right back screen, I'll be right back. Oh, here we go. Okay, thanks for waiting. Oh, let me put on my mysterious music again. Okay. All right, let's see. The assistant predestinator was perfectly right. Could be separately and distinctly felt. The Negro had a helicopter accident, fell on his head. Thump. Thump is the sound of two things hitting each other. So, like this. That's kind of a thump. That's kind of a thumping noise. What? Uh-oh. That made... Me hitting the table made my mouse go weird. Uh-oh. I'm having mouse problems today. I have three mouses, or mice. And I can only get one of them to work sometimes. Okay. What is... I don't remember. There's a character from a cartoon. I think if I type his name, then I'll know. And it's a rabbit, and his name is Thumper, but I don't remember what he's from. Thumper. Oh, Bambi. That's funny because I've never seen Bambi, but for some reason I know the character Thumper. That was a cartoon when I was a kid, so a very long time ago. A very popular movie from the late 70s called Bambi. I never watched that, but for some reason I know this character, which is a rabbit, and his name is Thumper. Why do you think his name is Thumper? Because imagine the sound a rabbit would make when it's jumping, when it's hopping through the field. Thump, 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 thump. That's a thump. With a twinge through the forehead, a chorus of ows and ayes went up from the audience. The concussion knocked all the Negro's conditioning into a cocked hat. He developed for the beta blonde an exclusive and maniacal passion. She protested. He persisted. There were struggles, pursuits, and assault on arrival. Finally, a sensational kidnapping. The beta blonde was ravished away into the sky and kept there, hovering for 3 weeks in a wildly antisocial tete-a-tete with the black man. So that's a French phrase, tete-a-tete. Tete means head, so that means head to head. And when you have a tete-a-tete with someone, it's two people, only two people. So if you want to be very, very fancy in English, you can invite someone for lunch. Let's have a tete-a-tete, which means just you and me, no other people, just the two of us. We can talk. So that's what they're saying, that the character took the woman and brought her somewhere, and it was only those two people for 3 weeks. They had a tete-a-tete. Finally, after a whole series of adventures and a much aerial acrobacy, 3 handsome young alphas succeeded in rescuing her. The Negro was packed off to an adult reconditioning center, and the film ended happily and decorously, with the beta blonde becoming the mistress of all 3 of the rescuers. They interrupted themselves for a moment to sing a synthetic quartet, with full super orchestral accompaniment and gardenias on the scent organ. A gardenia is a type of flower. Then the bearskin made a final appearance, and amid a blare of saxophones, the last stereoscopic kiss faded into the darkness. Do you know a stereoscope? Because I think this was written in the 30s, stereoscope. Actually, I'm just going to check. You know what a stereo is, but let me check to see when this book was written. When was Brave New World written? 1932. Okay, so you know what a stereo is? The reason they call it a stereo is because before a stereo, you had one speaker, and so the sound was very boring. And so the stereo was 2 speakers, which made a bigger, fuller sound. Let's just check the definition of stereo. But I think it means like more than one, or more than one dimension. Let's see, stereo. Let's see what the real, not my definition, but the real definition is. Stereo, more than one sound that is directed through 2 or more speakers, so that it seems like the listener is surrounded by the sound. But why don't they just say what the word stereo means? Solid. It's Greek for solid, but that doesn't make any sense. But let's say that when you use the word stereo, it means more than one dimension. So if you're listening to music from one speaker, it's kind of boring. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4 speakers, you have a new dimension of music. You're surrounded by music. So, and then when you see the word scope, you know, you have microscope. Micro means small, and scope means see. So, like, if you have a microscope, you see very small things. If you have a telescope, You can see things from very far away. Tele means from, I think, from very far away or something like that. So telescope means see things from very far away. Stereoscope means see things in more than one dimension. And that used to be a thing 100 years ago. They would have these things called a stereoscope. So if you have the picture and you look through the stereoscope, it looks like 3 dimensions. It looks like, so you can see this building here. If you look through those glasses, it looks a little bit like the building is in 3 dimensions. So it seems like this is a 3D movie in a way. And that's why they're using the word stereoscope. So the last stereoscopic kiss. So they're watching a kiss through stereoscope. So maybe they feel like they're being kissed or they're in the kiss. Faded into the darkness. The last 3 electric titillation died on the lips like a dying moth that quivers. Quivering is a movement, like, ooh, a movement like that. Ever more feebly. Feeble means weak or soft. Ever more faintly. Faintly means weak. And at last is quite still. Before Lenina, the moth did not completely die, even after the lights had gone up. While they were shuffling slowly along with the crowd towards the lifts, its ghost still fluttered. That's what a moth... Well, maybe you don't know what a moth is. I better show you a picture of a moth. Although I missed the reference to the moth. I'm not sure why they're talking about a moth. I guess she saw a moth or something. I don't know. That's a moth. It's like an ugly butterfly. People like butterflies, but people hate moths. But they're sort of the same thing. Except moths are ugly. So you can picture the moth, and this is fluttering. Even after the lights had gone off, while they were shuffling slowly along with the crowd towards the lifts, its ghost still fluttered against her lips. Still traced fine shuddering roads of anxiety and pleasure across her skin. Her cheeks were flushed. That means that they were warm and red. Her eyes dewily bright. Her breath came deeply. She caught hold of Savage's arm and pressed it, limp, against her side. He looked down at her for a moment, pale, pained, desiring, and ashamed of his desire. He was not worthy. Not... Their eyes for a moment met. What treasures hers promised! A queen's ransom of temperament. Hastily, she looked away, disengaged his imprisoned arm. You know, that word engaged means connect. So if she disengaged his arm, they're walking arm in arm, and she disconnected his arm. He was obscurely terrified lest she should cease to be something he could feel himself unworthy of. I don't think you ought to see things like that, he said, making haste to transfer from Lenina herself to the surrounding circumstances the blame for any past or possible future lapse from perfection. Things like what, John? Like this horrible film. Horrible, Lenina. Lenina was genuinely astonished, but I thought it was lovely. It was base, he said indignantly. It was ignoble. She took her head. I don't know what you mean. Why was he so queer? So he's calling the movie base. You know, if you watch a movie, maybe there's a story, but all they're really doing is having sex or something. It's a movie with no substance. There's nothing happening in the movie. So he's calling it base, meaning there's no substance. It's a very superficial movie. But she doesn't understand that. She enjoyed the movie. She shook her head. I don't know what you mean. Why was he so queer? That just means strange. Why was he so strange? Why did he go out of his way to spoil things, to ruin things? In the taxicopter, he hardly even looked at her, bound by strong vows. A vow is a promise that he had never pronounced. Obedient to laws that had long since ceased to run, he sat averted so he wouldn't look at her. He sat averted and in silence, sometimes as though a finger had plucked at some taut, almost breaking string. His whole body would shake with a sudden nervous start. The taxicopter landed on the roof of Lenina's apartment house. At last, she thought exultantly as she stepped out of the cab. At last, even though he had been so queer just now. Standing under a lamp, she peered into her hand mirror. At last, yes. Her nose was a bit shiny. She took the loose powder from her puff. While she was paying off the taxi, there would just be time. She rubbed the shininess, thinking, he's terrible. So she's applying powder to her face. He's terribly good looking. No need for him to be shy like Bernard, and yet any other man would have done it long ago. Well, now at last, that fragment of a face in the little round mirror. So she's applying makeup, but she's looking at his face in the mirror. Suddenly smiled at her. "Good night," said a strangled voice behind her. Lenina wheeled round. He was standing in the doorway of the cab, his eyes fixed, staring, had evidently been staring all this time while she was powdering her nose. Waiting, but for what? Or hesitating, trying to make up his hand, and all the time thinking. She could not imagine what extraordinary thoughts. "Good night, Lenina," he repeated, and made a strange, grimacing attempt to smile. "But John, I thought you were... aren't you..." He shut the door and bent forward to say something to the driver. The cab shot up into the air. Looking down through the window in the floor, the savage could see Lenina's upturned face, pale in the bluish light of the lamps. The mouth was open. She was calling. Her foreshortened figure rushed away from him. The diminishing square of the roof seemed to be falling through the darkness. 5 minutes later, he was back in his room. From its hiding place, he took out his mouse-nibbled volume, turned with religious care its stained and crumpled pages, and began to read Othello. Othello, he remembered, was like the hero of the 3 Weeks in a Helicopter, a black man. Drying her eyes, so that made Lenina cry because she felt very rejected. Lenina walked across the roof to the lift. On her way down to the 27th floor, she pulled out her Soma bottle. 1 gram, she decided, would not be enough. Hers had been more than a 1-gram affliction. But if she took 2 grams, she ran the risk of not waking up in time tomorrow morning. She compromised, and into her cupped left palm, she took out 3.5-gram tablet. She took out 3 half-gram tablets. All right, well, that was the end of chapter 11 of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. So next time we will read chapter 12. I think that will have to wait until Thursday because I'm going to be busy in the mornings for the next 3 days. So I hope to see you back here on Thursday at around the same time when we will continue with chapter 12 of Brave New World. Thank you, everybody who stayed and watched, and thank you for all of your questions and comments, and I hope you come back on Thursday for chapter 12. But we're getting close to the end of the book, actually. It's getting very close. All right. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.